Hello, I'm Emily. This is an Unreal Engine 5.2 tutorial on how to make a simple turn-based battle system within a widget blueprint. Just a small disclaimer before we start. While plugins won't be required for this tutorial, I will still recommend downloading and enabling this plugin. It allows you to add paper 2D flipbooks to your widgets, which can help add animation to your widget without having to move things manually. With that out of the way, let's move right on to how to create this battle system. We will be using a third-person default map, but anything that comes with a built-in player character will work. First things first, make sure you have a sensible folder structure. Make a folder for all of your battle system assets and blueprints. Right-click the content browser and create a folder. Let's call it Battle System. Go ahead and make a folder in that folder called Blueprints, and another called Assets. The Assets folder is where you would keep all the images for your widget, as well as any sprites for your flipbooks, or custom UI elements like buttons or icons. Let's make our enemy. Right-click the content browser again and select Blueprint Class. We want an actor class. Just like the folders, having a good naming convention will help you find things that you need a lot quicker. So before starting your projects, make sure you have a consistent naming convention. There is a recommended one you can use, which you can find in the official Unreal Engine documentation website. A link to that can be found in the description of this video. Let's call this blueprint BP_enemy. Once that's been created, double-click it to edit it. The first thing you will be shown is the viewport, where you can edit what parts of the blueprint will be visible when you drag it into your main scene. Here, we want to press the Add button at the top left and search for Box Collision. Click on it and add your components, and name it Hitbox. Click on Add again and look for Cube. Add that to your components. You can name that Enemy. This will be the stand-in for whatever you want to be the actual enemy you fight in-game. Feel free to swap this cube out for your own art asset for your enemy. You can use the Resize tool in the top right of the viewport to make the cube smaller than the hitbox. You can also alternatively use the Transform tab on the very right in the Details section. In this instance, the cube has to be smaller than the hitbox, because you need to be able to enter the hitbox to initiate the battle. Once you've finished that, right-click the hitbox within Components and select Add Event. Then find On Component Begin Overlap. This will bring you to the event graph. We will add nodes here soon, but first we need to make our widget. Remember to click Compile and then Save, then move back to the content browser. Right-click the content browser again, and at the very bottom of the drop-down menu, under User Interface, click Widget Blueprint. The class we need is User Widget. Let's call this one BP_HUD. Widgets are shown on top of everything else on the screen, and are in 2D, so they are great for user interface elements. Double-click on that newly created Widget Blueprint. You will be met with this screen. In the center is the scene. This is what's shown to the player when the blueprint is on screen. On the left is the palette, where you can drag and drop things into your scene. First things first, within the palette, search up Canvas panel and drag it into the scene. This will show a green box. That denotes the bounds of the screen. Everything in it will be shown, and everything outside of it will be cut off. It defaults to 1920 by 1080 pixels, which is a 16 by 9 aspect ratio. This is one of the most common screen ratios, so you won't need to change anything there. In the bottom left, you can see the hierarchy. Right-click the Canvas panel in the Hierarchy tab, then rename it to HUD. So here's where we'd like to show our player their character's health on screen. Within Palette once again, find Horizontal Box and drag it into the Canvas panel. This will ensure that all of our text is aligned. Edit its size X and size Y in the Details tab on the top right. This can be whatever you think looks nicest. I've gone with 500X and 200Y. You can then move it to where you'd like it to show up on screen. I want my player's health to be in the top left of the screen, coordinates 0x and 0y. Next, in the Details tab again, set the anchor to be corner aligned. This is denoted by the largest of the squares. The reason we set this is so that even if the screen is resized, it will always know where it needs to be placed on screen. Then, in the palette again, find text and drag two of them directly into the horizontal box, right next to each other. Then click on the text within the horizontal box. In the Details tab, you can add padding to the text, so that the box isn't so cramped. I went with 15 for both of them. The leftmost text box we'll call Player Health. The rightmost one can be left alone for now. Click Compile and then Save, as you did with the previous blueprint, and let's go add this to our screen. Once you're back to your content browser, move out of the folder that you're in, and back to the main folder. In the folder called Third Person, there's a folder called Blueprints. In that folder is your third-person character blueprint. Double-click this and it'll open up. We can ignore most of the nodes in here. The top one will be the only one we interact with. Find the red node called Event Begin Play. We want this one specifically because we only need to have the HUD appear on screen once, and that's when the game begins. Then, click and drag Event Begin Play over to the left a little. Then, click and drag from the white arrow exiting Event Begin Play and pull it over to the right, then release your click. A drop-down menu will then appear. Type into the search within this drop-down menu, Create Widget. Click Create Widget, and then your node will appear. Inside this new node, select the purple Class section that has a drop-down menu of its own, and type in, or find, BP_HUD. Then, on the right side of the node, right-click on the blue return value, and then click on Promote to Variable. This creates the reference that we'll be using so that our enemy blueprint can interact with the widget that we created. A box with the title Set will appear. Plug the white exec arrow out from the right of the Create Widget node into the left of the Set node. Then the right of the Set node's white exec arrow back into the Cast to Player Controller node. This way you don't mess with any of the blueprints that are there by default. If you look to the left of your screen, at the Variables section, there is now a new variable called new var. If you click on this, specifically not the drop-down part, you'll get the details for this specific variable on the right. Rename this variable HUD_var. Finally, from the Set node, pull off the exec arrow and type into the search Add to Viewport. Plug the rightmost blue circle into the Target section on the Add to Viewport node. And once again, make sure the exec arrow from the Add to Viewport is still plugged in to the Cast to Player controller over to the right. One other tip to keep your workflow steady and tidy is to highlight all the nodes that we just placed and press C on your keyboard to add a comment box. You can change the colour and what the title is of the comment in the Details tab. It may seem redundant and kind of silly in this case, as the nodes are rather self-explanatory, but believe me, if you have a lot of nodes, reminding yourself what they do can really speed up the, oh yeah, that's what that blueprint does, and that definitely speeds up your workflow, especially if you're coming back to a project after having left it for a while. Then, once again, compile and save. Next up is player stats. Move back to the BP_HUD widget page, and look on the top right of the screen. There you will find a button that's called Graph. Click it and it'll bring you to the widget blueprint's event graph. On the left, in the section marked Variables, click the small plus button to add a variable. We will need 7 of them right now. First, player health. You can rename it in the Details tab on the bottom left, or right-click and rename. As for its type, select the drop-down menu next to it and click on Integer, the greenish-teal one. This means it could be a positive or negative whole number, just no fractions like 0.5 or 11/16. The next two we're making are also integers. Name these player max damage and player min damage. The one after this is player turn. Make sure this one is Boolean, the dark red one. Boolean is a variable with only 2 forms, true or false. We can use this to check if it is the player's turn or if it is not the player's turn. The last 3 are very similar to the first 3, but instead are enemy health, enemy max damage, and enemy min damage. Make sure those are integers as well. Once again, compile and save your blueprint. Then, click on the player health variable again after compiling, and right at the bottom of the Details tab on the left is its default value. We're going to change this from 0 to 10. Go ahead and change the default value of all the variables. Player max damage for me will be 5 and min will be 3. Enemy health is set to 7, max damage is 3 and min damage is 2. Though, depending on your game, or the amount of health your player has, you can change those numbers to whatever you think balances it out properly. Finally, click on Player Turn and set the default value to True. This means having the checkbox filled. This means that by default it's your turn, which means the player will have the first turn. Then, once again, compile and save. Next up, we'll add the buttons we use for attacking. Once again, make your way to the Designer tab, click the button next to Graph on the top. For this specific battle system, the buttons for fighting won't show up unless you're in a fight. For an easy way to add this, find another canvas panel, search for it again in the palette, and drag it into the scene. This time, though, it won't automatically resize itself to the correct size, so in the Details tab, change its size X and size Y to 1920X and 1080Y. Then set its position, X and Y, to both be 0. Then finally change the anchor to the large box once again. We're going to rename this canvas panel to Fight UI. To make sure that the Fight UI will be on top of the rest of the HUD, change the Z order in the Details tab of the canvas panel to 1. The canvas below is set to 0 by default. Go back into the graph editor for BP_HUD and add one more variable. Call it Fight UI and set its type to Canvas Panel. You might need to search for it. This time, drag a horizontal box into the Fight UI canvas panel on the hierarchy, so that it's specifically situated within it, as if the canvas panel was a folder. Place, resize, and anchor the box to where you want the buttons to go. I have chosen the bottom left, because my horizontal box is again 500 by 200 pixels. It fits perfectly in the bottom left with the positions 0x and 880y. Make sure you set the position before you change the anchor, as with this specific anchor you can only edit the offset rather than the exact position and size. Next, drag a button from the palette into the new horizontal box. Then drag a text box. Make sure it's under the button in the hierarchy. Once again, add the padding. For consistency, I'm making mine 15. Rename the button in the hierarchy to Attack Button. Edit the text that's within the button to say Attack. Then, find and click the second option within both horizontal and vertical alignment in the Details tab of the button. Now that that's all nicely set up, we can turn our attention back to the first HUD panel. We can then make the player health text reflect the player health variable that we just created earlier. You can change the Fight UI panel's visibility to off by clicking the I button next to it in the Hierarchy tab. Once that canvas panel has been hidden, you can click on the things below it. Click on the other text box that we didn't do anything with earlier. We can align them both nicely like the button by clicking the second options in horizontal and vertical alignment again. Then, find the text section again in Content and press on this button called Bind. Here, in the drop-down menu, we can bind this text to the variable we made earlier called Player Health. Compile and save. If we go back to the content browser and press play, you can see that now the Fight button and the player's health is shown on screen. Because the text is bound to the variable, it will update when the variable changes. Now, as you saw, the Fight button was visible, and we don't want that to always be there, so we will go back to BP_HUD again and select the Fight UI panel. Look for Visibility in the Behavior subsection within the Details tab. We want to change this to Hidden, then compile and save. Now when we hit play, the button is gone, and we will now control when this appears. Open the enemy blueprint again, and go to the event graph. Look for the onComponentOverlap event that we set up earlier, and drag the exec arrow off of it and search up cast to BP_third person character. Once you have the cast node, plug the other actor from the onComponentOverlap into the object slot of the cast to BP_third person character. Then, from the cast node, pull from the asBP third person character on the right of the node and find HUDVAR, the variable we set up earlier. From HUDVAR, drag out the Fight UI variable. From the Fight UI variable, drag out Set Visibility. Make sure that the Invisibility section is set to Visible. Invisibility section? Invisibility section. Invisibility section. Invisibility section. Once that's done, right-click on your hitbox in the Components tab in the top right, and then add the event onComponentEndOverlap. Then just copy-paste the nodes that you have above. Make sure to plug the white exec arrow and the other actor in the same way as the above nodes. Change the visibility of the below one to hidden, and then compile and save. Now we can even check to see if that works. When you walk in range of the enemy, the Fight UI will appear, and then when you leave, it will disappear. Go back to the content browser, and find your BP_enemy in the blueprints folder that you created. Instead of clicking to open it, click and drag it into the scene, just in front of the player start. This will be the symbol in your scene that looks like a controller next to a flag. Let's now add the enemy stats. The exact same way as earlier, set up another horizontal box with 2 text blocks in it. Make sure that it is within the Fight UI canvas panel so that it only appears when we are in battle with an enemy. The box is the same size as before, the padding is set to 15, and the horizontal box is at 1420x and 0y. That way it's at the top right of the screen. The first box has its text changed to enemy health, and the second text box has its text bound to the enemy health variable. We can now set up the turn-based combat. Move back to the event graph of BP_HUD, and right-click within the graph on Nothing. Then search for Add Custom Event. Click it and call it Battle Begin. Then move to your BP_enemy event graph. Right-click on the background again and type Battle Begin. Then plug the top Set Visibility exec arrow into it. Take another blue wire off of your HUD variable and plug that into the target slot of Battle Begin. This means that once the Fight UI is visible, the Battle Begin event is triggered. Compile and then save. During the battle, we don't want the player to be able to move, so when the battle begins and this event is triggered, we can take away the player's input. Move back to BP_HUD's event graph and drag the exec arrow from Battle Begin. Type in Get All Actors of Class. Once this node is created, change the purple actor class to BP third person character. Drag the exec arrow off of that node and type in Disable Input. Plug the out actors into Target. Then right-click on Nothing, type in Get Player Controller, and plug that into the Get Player Controller slot. Then, right after Disabled Player Input, drag the Player Turn variable out from the Variables tab on the left, and then select Set. Then plug the exec arrow into that, and make sure the checkbox is checked. This sets the player's turn to be true, so that when you enter the battle, you go first. You go first by default, as that's what we set the default value for the variable to be already, but just in case the variable is not true when you enter battle, this makes sure that it is. Once you've done that, go back to the Designer tab in BP_HUD, and click on your button in the hierarchy. Scroll all the way to the bottom of the Details tab on the right, then click the plus that's next to OnClicked in the Events subsection. This will send you back to the event graph, with a new event called OnClicked. We want to make sure that you can only click it on your turn, so we will set up some logic. Drag the exec arrow off the new OnClicked event, and type Branch. This node will follow the true execution when the conditions are true, and false when they are false. Our condition will be, is it the player's turn? Yes. Okay then, damage the enemy. Pull the player turn variable from the variables tab, and this time select get. Plug the player turn into the condition slot, and there, your logic is set. Now we want to be able to damage the enemy. So drag the enemy health variable from the tab and click set. Then drag the exec arrow from true and add a delay. Change the duration to 1 second inside the node, then plug the exec arrow into the set enemy health variable. Now then, we don't want to kill the enemy immediately, because then there would be no challenge. That's where the min and max damage come in. Go ahead and get these 3 variables: player max damage, min damage, and enemy health. Then add the node random integer in range, and plug our min and max damage into the corresponding slots. To take this random number in range away from the enemy health, we just have to subtract it. Right-click somewhere in the event graph and press the minus button on your keyboard. Alternatively, you can write the word subtract. Plug the enemy health variable in the top and the random integer in range return value in the bottom. Then finally plug the results of that into the set enemy health node. We don't want the player to be able to spam click the button to do damage every single time they click. So after the branch, we want to add in a node that stops it from being the player's turn. So in between the branch and the delay, add the player turn variable and press set. Make sure the checkbox is empty. And now, for the simplest AI you've ever seen, we will set up a you attack me, well, then I'll attack you system. After you've set the enemy health, drag off another delay, and set this one to 1 second again. I add these delays in for comfort, as when they are instant, they're usually a bit too fast for the player. This is also where you can put animations in, or swap your enemy sprite for its hurt sprite, and then back to its idle. This is done relatively easily, as when you add an image from the palette, you can select what image it displays in the Details tab, under Appearance, and then in the Brush subsection. You can then swap this out with another image in the event graph. You can do this with the Set Brush from Texture node, as long as you plug the correct variable into the target slot. When you add an image to your canvas from the palette, it automatically creates a variable for it. Mine in this case is image_0, because I did not rename it. Once you've set the delay, we set up the enemy attack in the same way as our attack, except with the enemy's damage variables and our health instead. Once you've done that, set the player turn back to true, and thus the cycle of violence can repeat. But lo, I hear you cry. The mouse cursor is invisible when I press play. There's only a few more things to do. When you press play, the mouse cursor is still invisible, and when the enemy's health gets to 0, the battle doesn't end. This is how you get that done. Inside of BP_enemy, add the node called setShowMouseCursor, and have it be true after battle begins, and false after the end overlap event. This will only work if the node knows what player controller it needs to allow the mouse to be seen in. So add the node getPlayerController and plug that into both target slots for the setShowMouseCursor nodes. The getPlayerController needs to know what player it is too, so plug its leftmost end into the asBP third-person character in the casting node. This will automatically add another node between that, and then you're set. Now the mouse will appear when you're in battle, and will disappear when you're not. Finally, to end the battle, make another custom event within BP_enemy. Call it Enemy Death. Pull the exec arrow off of it, and add the node Destroy Actor. The target is already by default self, so you don't have to plug anything else in. Compile and save. Then, in BP_HUD, at the end of the enemy's attack, pull off the exec arrow from setPlayerTurn and add a branch. Get your enemy health variable, use the less equal node, which checks if a number is less than or equal to a certain number. By default, it's 0, so just plug the enemy health variable into the top. Then plug that into your branch condition. Out of the true branch, attach our new event called Enemy Death. If you can't see it, you may need to deselect Content Specific from the action search to find it. For this event to be triggered, you'll have to add the node getAllActors of class between the true branch and the Enemy Death event. Change the purple section on getAllActors of class to BP_enemy, and plug the outActors into the target slot of Anemone? Anemone. Emily Anemone. Emily's an enemy anemone. Anyway, plug the outActors into the target slot for the Enemy Death event. Then finally, drag the exec arrow off of the Enemy Death event and use the getAllActors of class once again, but this time change the actor class purple section to be your BP third-person character, and connect the node Enable Input to it, as you did before when you disabled the input in this very blueprint. Compile and save, and that's it. You're done. If this tutorial was at all follow-alongable, then you should have a blueprint that lets you have a turn-based battle. All of this can be expanded upon, as I mentioned before, especially with animations and images. You can also have your buttons make drop-down menus, and then those drop-down menus can have different attacks within them. You could then give those attacks their own variables, and take their damage away from the enemy's health, just like we did in here. But don't worry, even simple blueprints can be very pretty once you've art-passed them. Here's an example of a game that I've made, where I've used this exact same blueprint. This uses the plugin I mentioned earlier, where you can use flipbooks flipbooks within widgets. During each delay within BP_HUD, I'm swapping out the flipbooks for different animation. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.